In a world that likes to think of itself as civilized and fair, there are still moments that remind us privilege can sometimes weigh heavier than principle. It was a quiet morning at the Regal Air Elite Lounge, the most luxurious VIP area in Hudson International Airport. Two young black women, Alyssa and Aria Bennett, 24-year-old identical twins, were getting ready for their first-class flight to London. They weren't celebrities. They weren't born into wealth. They were simply two brilliant young founders of a fintech app designed to help underprivileged communities gain access to financial knowledge. But then, a white woman walked in. She demanded that the twins give up their first-class seats so she could sit next to her husband because, as she put it, they didn't look like the kind of people who belong up front. What seemed like a small request set off a domino effect, starting from one speakerphone call to a cultural reckoning within a major corporation, and eventually a stunning fall from grace for the privileged elite. This story isn't just about two seats on a plane. It's about dignity, about how people choose to respond when they're disrespected. Not with anger, but with intelligence and calm strength. And it was that very attitude that made the world stop and think who truly deserves to sit in first class. If you believe that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard, hit like, share, and subscribe, and join me as we dive into the story. Black twins asked to switch VIP seats for white passenger, and their phone call changed everything. Regal Air Elite Lounge, Hudson International Airport. The air here wasn't busy. It was so still. You could hear the sound of ice melting in a glass of champagne. Men in navy suits whispered about energy stocks. A woman in pearls bragged softly about her new vacation home in Tuscany. Everything from the oak scent in the air to the amber light reflecting off marble tables breathed the quiet assurance of carefully curated privilege. In the far corner, two black women sat by the tall glass window overlooking a rain-soaked runway. They were twins, same posture, same face, only their eyes held different stories. Alyssa, the older one, sat upright, her calm gaze gliding over her laptop screen like someone who always had control. Aria, the younger, leaned slightly forward, one hand adjusting her earphones, the other flipping through blockchain presentation slides. Her lips pressed in focus. They were dressed simply yet elegantly, camel cashmere coats, matching joggers, crisp white sneakers, nothing flashy. But somehow, their quiet presence drew attention. That kind of elegance you can't quite define, only feel. Alyssa glanced at her sister and said softly, "Check the demo again. Daniel loves throwing tough questions." Aria smiled. "I know. And this time, I've got answers." It wasn't the small talk of two girls on vacation. It was the focused exchange of young professionals used to being respected for their ability, not their appearance. On the table between them, two first-class tickets, Regal Air First Class, seats 1A and 1B, booked with corporate points from their own company. Nexus Rise, a fintech app that empowers underprivileged communities to learn about investing and financial literacy. Those tickets weren't a gift. They were the result of hard work. Alyssa still remembered the night they received their first seed funding. They made a promise to each other: if we ever fly first class, it won't be to show off. It'll be to prove that black women can sit anywhere, purely by their own intelligence. And today, they were here surrounded by tailored suits, polite smiles, and eyes that were respectful, but not necessarily warm. A flight attendant approached with a polite smile. "Would you ladies like another glass of champagne?" Alyssa shook her head. Aria thanked her quietly. They were always courteous, never giving anyone the chance to label them. Then the sound of heels clicking echoed from the lounge entrance. Sharp, precise, like the ticking of an expensive watch. A white woman in her 50s appeared. blonde hair perfectly curled, thin gold-rimmed glasses resting on her nose. Around her wrist gleamed the Regal Air Platinum Premier bracelet, polished metal glinting pale blue under the light. Behind her followed a young attendant in a Navy uniform. His name tag read, Ethan Cole. Victoria Langford didn't look around. She walked straight to the counter and said, in a firm, practiced tone, "Excuse me, I'm Victoria Langford. I called ahead. My husband is seated in 1C on the London flight. I need to sit beside him." Ethan nodded quickly, typing on his computer. He hesitated for a split second. Ma'am, the first-class cabin is already full. I can check if Victoria cut him off with a glance around the room." Her eyes stopped at the two young black women sitting quietly in the corner. "What about those two?" Her voice was cool, commanding. Ethan blinked. "They're passengers in seats 1A and 1B, ma'am." "Then move them," Victoria said flatly. "I've been a Premier member for 10 years. I assume the airline knows who to prioritize." Ethan swallowed hard. Sweat formed under his collar. He looked at the twins, young, polite, professional. Probably easier to reason with than this platinum customer. "Maybe," he began cautiously, "if they agree to switch to business class, the airline can compensate them with a $500 voucher each." From across the room, Alyssa heard every word. She set her glass down and looked at her sister. Their eyes met silent, knowing. Arya closed her laptop. The click echoed through the pristine lounge. She stood and walked toward the counter. "Excuse me," she said evenly. "Were you talking about us?" Ethan gave an uneasy smile. Yes, ma'am. There's just a passenger who'd like to switch seats. And the airline would—" "We're not switching," Arya interrupted. Calm, firm. These seats were booked for business purposes. We need the workspace, not the voucher. Victoria raised an eyebrow and smiled the kind of smile that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be so tense. It's just a seating arrangement. Let the adults handle this." Alyssa stood beside her sister, her voice low but steady. "We're not tense. We're simply keeping what's rightfully ours." The room fell silent. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A man in a black suit pretended to read his magazine, but the reflection in the glass table betrayed his attention. Ethan looked around, desperate to diffuse the tension. "Mrs. Langford, I'll call the manager," he said softly, voice trembling. "Please, everyone, just a moment." No one spoke again, but the atmosphere shifted, from warm to cold, from courteous to fragile, like a string about to snap. Alyssa turned toward the window. Outside, the rain kept falling, tiny droplets catching the runway lights. She drew in a long breath. She knew what this was. In the quietest rooms, sometimes the loudest sounds come from arrogance colliding with dignity, and this was only the beginning. The sound inside the Regal Air Elite Lounge changed, not louder, just sharper. The click of a woman's high heels sliced through the soft jazz humming from the hidden wall speakers. Victoria Langford entered as if she owned the place. Her perfectly curled blonde hair, the faint trail of expensive perfume blending with the rich leather scent of her Hermes bag, she didn't need an introduction. You could see what kind of woman she was, the kind who wore privilege like a second skin. Behind her followed a young attendant, the silver gleam of his name tag catching the light. Ethan Cole, Regal Air staff. Ethan tried to keep his polite smile, but there was worry behind his eyes, the kind of worry that comes when you know the problem ahead is way above your pay grade. Victoria stopped at the counter and set her bag on the marble. Her voice cut through the room like a needle through velvet. "Good afternoon." I'm Victoria Langford. I have a business class ticket on the London flight. But my husband, Edward Langford, is in seat 1C first class. I need to be seated next to him." Ethan nodded quickly, fingers tapping at the keyboard. "Of course, ma'am. However, the first-class cabin is currently full. But I can check if anyone would be willing to switch." Victoria crossed her arms and swept her gaze across the lounge as though she were scanning her own property. Then she stopped. By the large window a few rows away, Alyssa and Aria Bennett sat quietly, focused on their work. Afternoon light streamed through the glass, glinting off the copper tones in their braided hair and the subtle shine of their gold hoop earrings. That image, two young black women in a room otherwise filled with older white travelers, made Victoria's lips curve faintly. She tilted her head toward Ethan, lowering her voice just enough for others to still hear. "What about them?" Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry." "Ma'am, you mean the two guests by the window?" "Yes," Victoria replied coolly, as if she were pointing to empty seats instead of people. "I'm sure they wouldn't mind moving down to business. They're young. They don't need the extra space." Ethan froze. He knew exactly what this was, that quiet, polished kind of disrespect that came wrapped in entitlement. But he also knew Victoria was a Platinum Premier member for 10 years, the kind of customer whose complaint could land directly on the CEO's desk. He checked the manifest again. Seats 1A, 1B, Alyssa Bennett, Aria Bennett. Seat 9D, Victoria Langford. The flight was full. There was no reasonable way to switch unless someone volunteered. Ethan swallowed hard, then spoke gently, part apology, part plea. "Mrs. Langford, those passengers confirmed their first-class seats months ago, but I could ask if they'd be willing to exchange. The airline can offer a $500 voucher each as compensation." Victoria smiled, the kind of smile belonging to someone who'd been told yes all her life. "That's a good idea. And if they hesitate, tell them it's really just a small favor. I'm sure they'll understand." Across the room, Alyssa looked up when she heard the word voucher. She turned to Aria, her eyes silently asking, "Did you catch that Aria slipped off her headphones and placed them neatly on the table?" They didn't need to speak. 24 years of shared glances had built an unspoken language between them. Alyssa closed her laptop quietly, like closing a door between themselves and the noise around them. Aria rose first, every motion deliberate, composed, no rush, no anger, like someone stepping onto a stage that didn't need a spotlight. She approached the counter, voice steady. "Excuse me, were you talking about us?" Ethan turned, his face flushing red. "Ah, hello." "Yes." "Well, there's a guest who'd like to change seats. The airline can offer each of you a $500 voucher and arrange comfortable seats in business class area." Didn't let him finish. "We're not switching. 3 words, calm, clear, sharp enough to slice the air." Victoria arched an eyebrow and turned toward them, wearing that condescending smile only the privileged seemed to master. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just a seat arrangement. I'd like to sit next to my husband." You and your friend Alyssa stepped forward, cutting in smoothly. "She's my sister, and our seats were booked for a business trip. We need the workspace, not the discount." The room went still. The clinking of spoons and glasses stopped mid-motion. An older gentleman at the next table cleared his throat not from annoyance, but from the discomfort of not knowing where to look. Victoria blinked, then forced a small laugh, her tone frostier now. "Goodness, everyone's so sensitive these days. I just thought you'd be easier to rearrange. That's all." She turned to Ethan, tightening her grip on control. "Go ahead, young man. Your airline would rather please a loyal 10-year member than—" A couple of young ladies. Right. Ethan's face drained of color. He knew he was standing on a fault line. Before he could answer, Arya spoke again, low and even. Maybe your airline should prioritize customers who paid for their confirmed seats regardless of who they are. Victoria scoffed, one hand on her hip. You're being rude. I'm simply asking to sit beside my husband. Alyssa met her gaze. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And we're simply asking to stay in our seats. Silence. The kind that feels heavy, stretching long enough for a nearby server to shuffle glasses just to fill the space. Ethan checked his watch, his voice small. If you'll excuse me, I'll call the supervisor to resolve this. Arya returned to her seat and opened her laptop, though her fingers no longer moved. Not from anger, but from the weight in the air. That dense, unspoken awareness of being watched. Judged not for what you can do, but for what you look like. Alyssa stayed quiet. She laid her hand on the table and drew in a breath. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Marcus Caldwell, the man who'd taught them strength without shouting. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Just speak at the right moment and let the truth do the rest. She knew that moment was coming. The lounge doors slid open. A middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform entered, composed, professional. Her name tag gleamed, Linda Marston, lounge supervisor. Linda walked with the calm of someone who'd seen her share of crises, but still held on to her dignity. Her eyes swept the room once she didn't need explanations. She already knew. She stopped beside Ethan. What's going on here? Ethan stumbled through a summary. Linda listened, then nodded for him to read from the system. He did, voice quiet but clear. Seats. 1A, 1B Alyssa Bennett and Arya Bennett confirmed. Paid. Booked 3 months ago. Seat 9D Victoria Langford Business Class. Booked last week. Linda nodded once, her tone firm. Absolute. Then there's no reason for any change. No one has the right to ask confirmed passengers to give up their seats. The words were simple, but they hit the room like a gavel. The air split in two. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Victoria froze, her expression stiff. She pressed her lips together, speaking in a lower voice that still carried across the room. Oh, I see. Diversity optics. It does look good for PR seeing them up there in first class. A small click sounded. Arya had just locked her laptop screen. Alyssa looked at Victoria, her eyes calm. Unreadable, the kind of quiet that makes others feel small. Linda said nothing more. But in her eyes, a line had just been drawn between customer service and self-respect. The air inside Regal Air Elite Lounge had grown dense. No one spoke, but everyone could feel it, that silence had a shape. It crawled along the polished wooden floor, slipped between tailored suits and silk dresses, and came to rest between two gazes, one demanding privilege and one refusing to surrender it. Ethan Cole was the first to break the quiet. His voice was low, careful. Mrs. Langford, perhaps there's a middle ground. If the two ladies agree to move to business class, the airline can compensate each with a $500 voucher, plus priority boarding on their next flight. It sounded reasonable, but to Alyssa and Arya, it wasn't a compromise, it was a test. A test rooted in an old belief that everything has a price, and some people are simply cheaper than others. Victoria Langford leaned against the counter, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Her tone carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Yes. Tell them I'd really appreciate their help. They're young. I'm sure they'll understand. These girls. I'm sure they'll cooperate. The words "these girls" hit the air like acid. No one reacted right away, but something in the room shifted, cut in half by invisible tension. Alyssa stayed seated, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her expression was calm, still water hiding deep movement underneath. Arya was different. She tilted slightly forward and set her iPad down with a sharp thud. The sound cracked through the room, making a few nearby heads turn. Then she stood. Each step she took across the oak floor echoed slow, deliberate, unflinching. "Excuse me," she said, voice thin but unwavering. "Did you just suggest that we move?" Ethan pressed his lips together, avoiding her gaze. "No. And only meant the airline was offering an option, just trying to make everyone comfortable." "With a $500 voucher?" Arya asked, one eyebrow lifting. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes made his throat tighten. Victoria interjected, her voice cold and clipped. "Oh, for heaven's sake. It's a small matter. I don't understand why you're taking it so seriously. My husband and I have been loyal to this airline for over 10 years. Do you even know what Premier status means?" Alyssa finally spoke softly, but with a quiet authority that demanded attention. "Yes, we do. And we also know what confirmed first-class tickets mean." Victoria gave a light, patronizing laugh, part amusement, part pity. "Oh, darling, don't take offense. I just thought maybe you'd be more flexible. I'm sure the airline appreciates looking a little more inclusive, right?" The words slid through the air, leaving frost behind them. Ethan lowered his head. Linda, the supervisor, still stood nearby, silent, watching like a scientist observing an experiment in power dynamics. Arya's hand tightened briefly, then relaxed. She looked straight at Victoria, her tone even but cutting through the quiet. "We're not switching." The sentence landed like a gavel strike. "We booked these seats not to make a statement, but because we need the space to work. If you wanted to sit next to your husband, maybe you should have booked earlier." The last line came out calm, almost too calm, and yet, to Victoria, it felt like a slap. She opened her mouth to speak, but Arya's next words cut her off, crisp and polite in a way that only made them sting more. "We appreciate the airline's offer, but please stop negotiating. We are not a convenient solution for someone else's inconvenience." Alyssa still hadn't stood. She simply lifted her gaze toward the tickets lying on the table, 2 pieces of paper bearing their names, clearly printed, undisputed. In the corner, the small text caught the light first class, seats 1A, 1B. She exhaled quietly and looked up at Ethan. "Could you please confirm that our tickets are valid?" Ethan nodded, a relief flooding his face, as if someone had just granted him an escape. He read from the screen softly, "Yes, ma'am. Fully valid. Booked 3 months ago through your company account. Nexus Rise?" Alyssa nodded, offering a polite smile. "Then everything's settled." She turned to Arya. Their eyes met a silent understanding, stronger than any declaration. Arya collected her iPad and sat down again, opening her slides as though nothing had happened. Victoria remained standing, her face flushed from anger or humiliation. No one could tell. You have no idea who you're talking to," she said, her voice trembling from restraint. Alyssa looked up, her smile faint, like morning mist. "Perhaps not, but we know who we are." The sentence was soft, but it lowered the temperature of the room by several degrees. At a nearby table, a man quietly set his magazine down, pretending not to listen, but the reflection in his glass told the truth. He was listening. Everyone was. Linda finally spoke. Her tone was procedural, but her eyes carried weight. Regal Air cannot and will not remove passengers from confirmed seats. The matter ends here, Mrs. Langford. Victoria turned to Ethan with a tight gesture. He nodded and stepped away, likely to handle the fallout somewhere safer. Victoria stood frozen, gripping her handbag strap until her knuckles whitened. The feeling of being denied for the first time in years lodged like a stone in her throat. Her eyes lingered on the two young black women who just quietly refused to yield. And in her mind, that old unspoken question surfaced, the one she'd never dared name aloud. Why are they here? Why do they get to sit where I sit? But like anyone convinced of their own righteousness, she soothed herself with a lie. It's just a temporary injustice. Victoria turned sharply, her heels striking the floor in quicker rhythm now. No one saw her off. No polite goodbyes. Just silence and the composed, steady presence of the two women she had thought would be easy to persuade. Outside, the window reflected the pale gray sky. Alyssa glanced at her watch, her voice quiet. An hour till boarding. Arya nodded, eyes still on her screen, voice low but certain. I don't think they realize this story isn't over. Alyssa closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. That's all right. The truth has a way of speaking for itself. What she didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that this calm, silent moment would ignite a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Regal Air. Victoria Langford wasn't used to the word no. In her world, every door opened the moment she arrived, not because she knocked, but because people were afraid not to. But this time, Arya's words, "We're not switching," landed softly, like a breath, yet carried the weight of a blow. Victoria froze. 1 second, 2. Then her lips curved upward, as if trying to convince herself she'd misheard. You're refusing. Her voice trembled slightly somewhere between disbelief and insult. Alyssa answered, calm as ever. Yes, this isn't about money. We chose these seats for work reasons. We need the quiet to finalize our keynote. Changing seats would disrupt that. A pause stretched thin in the air. Victoria blinked, then forced a delicate smile, the kind of refined smile wealthy people use to hide irritation. Oh dear, such a simple thing turned into a problem. I only want to sit next to my husband. The airline's just trying to help. There's no need to be so defensive. Alyssa said nothing. She simply tilted her head slightly, her gaze so composed it felt like holding up a mirror. It was that composure, not defiance, that unsettled Victoria most. Arya gave a faint, dry laugh so subtle no one was sure if it really happened. We're being perfectly civil, ma'am. Perhaps it's just that some people aren't used to hearing the word no. Victoria swallowed hard, lips tightening. Her eyes darted around the room. People were watching now, pretending to check phones, stir coffee, or scroll through tablets, but watching all the same. The luxurious lounge had turned into a silent theater, an audience that hadn't paid for tickets but couldn't look away. Ethan Cole, the young staffer, felt the pressure rising on his shoulders. He cleared his throat, trying to sound neutral, but his voice betrayed a faint tremor. Ladies, I understand, but Mrs. Langford is a long-time Platinum Premier member. The airline truly values. Alyssa looked up, cutting in not with anger, but with reason. Mr. Cole, does the airline's policy allow higher-tier members to override passengers with confirmed, valid tickets? The question was quiet, yet it froze Ethan in place. He knew the answer, and it wasn't the one Victoria wanted. No, of course not, he stammered. We're only trying to be flexible. Flexible. Arya repeated softly, the words slicing through the air like a blade through wax. You call asking two black passengers to leave their paid seats flexible? Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't meant harm. He was just doing his job. But hearing the words black passengers echo in a mostly white lounge drained the color from his face. Victoria waved a hand sharply. Oh, don't start that. Let's not make this about race. I'm not prejudiced. I just assumed they'd be more understanding. They're young, adaptable, surely willing to help. Why must everything be made into drama? Alyssa studied her for a long moment. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, deliberate, like laying down bricks to build a bridge between two worlds. Sometimes, she said, people don't realize they're being offensive because they're too used to others giving way. No one replied. The sentence dropped like a pebble into still water quiet, but its ripples reached every corner. A middle-aged white man in the far corner slowly lowered his newspaper. An Asian woman holding a coffee cup paused mid-sip. No one spoke, but their eyes said everything. They understood. Victoria's face flushed red. How ridiculous, she muttered. I'm only asking for a bit of courtesy. You make it sound like I'm some kind of bigot. Arya tilted her head slightly. We didn't say that. You did. Ethan felt the situation slipping from his grasp. He lowered his voice. I'll call a senior manager to handle this. Please, everyone stay calm. Do your job, Alyssa said evenly. We'll wait. Arya sat back down, reopening her iPad, though her eyes never moved to the screen. She could feel the stares pressing down on her, not curious stares, evaluating ones, as if everyone wanted to see how the black girl would react. And in that moment, Arya realized something profound. Justice doesn't begin with actions. It begins with how people look at you. Victoria, unwilling to let go, sat down beside them and pulled out her phone. Her voice was low, but loud enough to be heard. Edward, she said into the receiver, you won't believe this. 2 young black girls are sitting in seats 1A and 1B, and they're talking to me as if they own Regal Air. The room went deathly still. Even the soft jazz seemed to hold its breath. Alyssa looked up, and for the first time, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of recognition. She understood she was standing in a pivotal moment, the line between the past and what comes next. She whispered to her sister, remember what Dad said? People show who they are when they feel their power slipping. Arya nodded, her lips tight. Looks like it's starting. Just then, Linda Marston, the lounge manager, returned. Her eyes scanned the room, Victoria fuming, Ethan nervous, and the Bennett sisters sitting calm at the center of the storm. What's going on here? Her voice was level, but it cut cleanly through the tension. Ethan recounted everything, hesitating only at the part about the $500 voucher. Linda listened, then, without hesitation, said, no more vouchers. The Bennett's first-class tickets are valid and confirmed. No one has the authority to ask them to move. This ends here. Alyssa gave a polite nod. Thank you. Arya said nothing. She simply turned back to her screen. Victoria stood abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. You'll regret this. All of you. I'll call Regal Air's executive board myself. Linda met her gaze, steady, professional. You go ahead, ma'am. I'll personally include my report. A few guests coughed softly, some hiding smiles. Victoria's heels struck the floor in sharp, furious rhythm. Ethan looked down, wishing he could vanish. Alyssa, meanwhile, turned toward the window. On the runway, a jet was taxiing, its silver body catching the light, a blade of steel against gray skies. She knew this confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun. The glass doors slid open again. That soft hiss in the dead silence of the lounge sounded like a gavel striking wood. Linda Marston walked in, a woman in her mid-40s, hair neatly pinned back, her Regal Air uniform pressed to precision. She moved with the quiet composure of someone who'd weathered years of crises without ever letting her voice shake. Her eyes swept across the room, quick, focused, missing nothing. She didn't need an explanation to know who was at the center of the storm. Victoria Langford still stood at the counter, face flushed red, clinging to a strained kind of dignity. Ethan Cole, the young attendant, kept his head down, fingers gripping a pen so tight his knuckles had gone white. And at their table, Alyssa and Aria Bennett sat with calm that bordered on defiance still, composed, as if they were simply waiting for boarding time. Linda took a breath, then crossed the room. "What's going on here?" she asked. Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was power in its steadiness. Ethan spoke quickly, tripping over details, but Linda pieced it together easily, a long-time VIP accustomed to privilege. 2 paying passengers asked to make room, and a young employee who'd made the wrong call out of fear. "Read me the records. Cole," she said. Ethan pulled up the flight log, his voice small but clear. "Seats 1A and 1B, Alyssa Bennett and Aria Bennett. Confirmed. Paid. Booked 3 months ago. Seat 9D Victoria Langford, business class. Booked last week." Linda nodded once, then turned to Victoria, her words slow, deliberate, each one landing like a quiet verdict. "You cannot remove confirmed passengers from their assigned seats. There are no exceptions, no emphasis, no apology, just truth." It was the language of someone who'd seen too many misunderstandings that only ever went one way: money right, skin color wrong. Victoria stood still, her lips pressed into a smile that aimed for superiority but missed the mark. "Ms. Marston, I understand you're just following protocol," she said, "but I imagine your airline wouldn't want to lose a loyal client like me." Linda met her gaze, not hostile, not timid, simply steady. Regal Air doesn't want to lose any of its customers, Mrs. Langford. But our first priority is fairness. Everyone has the right to keep the seat they paid for. Victoria gave a short, brittle laugh. Fairness. How quaint. Fairness only exists in your brochures. Ms. Marston. Linda didn't respond. She turned instead to the Bennett sisters, giving a small nod. "On behalf of the airline, I apologize for this situation. Your tickets are fully valid. No one should have asked you to move." Alyssa inclined her head politely. Her voice was calm, but her words carried quiet weight. "We understand, and we appreciate you saying that." Aria remained silent, her eyes flicking briefly toward Victoria, not angry, just knowing. That look unsettled Victoria more than any accusation could. Ethan stood frozen, hoping this was finally over. But Linda didn't leave. She turned to him, her voice low but firm. "Cole, next time don't break the rules out of fear. Not for anyone." Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." The room began to breathe again. Soft jazz resumed from the speakers. Someone ordered another glass of wine. It felt briefly like normal had returned, but normal was only an illusion. Victoria hadn't sat down. She stood near the counter, staring out the window, then back at the twins. Her smile returned thinner, colder. "I see now," she said, her tone laced with sugar and steel. "You're protecting the airline's diversity image, aren't you?" "Linda, they do look great in first class. Very on brand." Linda froze mid-step. Alyssa set her pen down. Arya lifted her head. No one spoke, yet it felt like the oxygen had been drained from the room. That one casual remark wasn't loud, wasn't crude, but it stripped the mask clean off privilege itself. Because real power doesn't shout, it insinuates. Victoria went on, half smiling, half sneering. Well, good for them. I suppose it's their first time flying first class. Isn't it? Ethan closed his eyes. He knew every attempt to contain this moment had just collapsed. Linda inhaled slowly, but didn't answer. Alyssa stayed silent, the kind of silence that forces others to hear their own echo. Arya turned to Victoria, her tone smooth, deliberate. You can think whatever you like, but maybe you've forgotten people like you only find diversity acceptable when it's not sitting beside you. A soft ding broke the silence, the intercom announcing boarding. The sound sliced through the tension like a blade. Linda clenched her hands briefly, then turned away. There was sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes from knowing that doing the right thing still isn't enough to fix what's wrong. Victoria stood frozen, face blank, eyes cold. She didn't speak again, but her silence said it all. I won't forget this. Alyssa and Arya gathered their things. No glares, no words, no need to prove anything. They rose, adjusted their coats, and walked toward the boarding gate steady, unhurried, certain. Behind them, every gaze in the lounge followed and slowly, quietly, began to turn inward. The doors slid shut. Linda watched them leave, exhaling softly a sigh that sounded almost like relief and defeat. Victoria remained where she was, phone in hand. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then began to move quickly. No one heard what she said, only the whisper of her voice. Edward, I need to speak to someone at the airline. Right now. The room was so still you could hear the wall clock ticking, each second landing softly onto the thick carpet. Everything seemed to be over at least, procedurally. But for those accustomed to privilege, rejection never ends quietly. Victoria Langford stood at the counter, hand clutching her designer handbag. The smile was still there, but her eyes had changed. That polite gray blue had turned glacial, like the surface of a lake just before it freezes. She leaned slightly toward Linda Marston, lowering her voice just enough to be heard by everyone nearby. I get it. Linda, you've got to keep the airline's diversity image polished. Right. They look good in first class, very PR friendly. A faint smirk touched her lips, the kind worn by people who believe their cynicism makes them clever. No one replied, but the silence itself made each word land heavier than a shout. Alyssa Bennett paused mid-motion. She didn't turn fully toward Victoria, just lifted her head slightly. Her gaze stayed distant, but her ears caught every syllable. Victoria's words weren't just condescension. They were a message from an old world that still whispered to people like her, you're here to make the picture look better, not because you belong in it. Arya set her glass down gently. It didn't shatter, didn't tremble, but her fingers tightened around the base, the kind of tension that belongs to someone who's learned to master her anger with intellect. Alyssa gave her sister a quiet look that said everything. Don't. Linda stood motionless. She had dealt with every type of traveler, entitled, impatient, impossible, but this was different. Victoria's words didn't just cross a line. They desecrated something Linda had spent her entire career protecting: professional integrity. In that instant, Linda realized something: the most dangerous form of prejudice doesn't scream. It smiles. It whispers. It hides behind good manners. Alyssa placed her laptop carefully into her bag, her movements deliberate, as if steadying her own heartbeat. Then she stood, voice low but firm. Mrs. Langford. Victoria turned, smiling, mistaking calmness for concession. Yes. Alyssa's voice was soft, almost gentle, but edged with unmistakable steel. We're not here to make anyone's brand look good. We're here because we paid for our seats with our work, our intellect, and our time. The air thickened. No one spoke, but a few guests lowered their newspapers, eyes flickering, caught between discomfort and recognition. Victoria shrugged, her smile tightening. Oh, don't take it personally. I didn't mean it that way. I just think young faces like yours make Regal Air look more progressive. That's all. Arya rose, her tone quiet but cutting cleanly through the noise. No need to explain. We understood you the first time. Linda stepped forward, voice sharp now, the courtesy stripped away. Mrs. Langford, that's enough. Your remarks are inappropriate for this space. If you're unhappy, you may contact customer service, but you will stop harassing these passengers immediately. Victoria laughed short, brittle, the sound of porcelain cracking. Harassing. I've flown with Regal Air for 10 years. No one's ever spoken to me like that. Are you really willing to lose a loyal customer over them? Alyssa exhaled softly. Her reply was barely above a whisper, but it carried farther than any raised voice could. If dignity is the price for keeping certain customers, then it's worth losing them. No dramatics, no emphasis, just truth, plain and final. Linda looked up, eyes steady, and for the first time that afternoon, Victoria had no answer. No one backed her up. The wealthy regulars who once shared her tone now avoided her eyes, not because they suddenly believed in equality, but because they didn't want to see their own reflection in her. Linda drew in a slow breath, her tone formal but absolute. Mrs. Langford, I must insist you stop speaking this way. You're violating lounge policy by verbally targeting other guests. If you wish to escalate, you may contact headquarters. But this conversation ends here. Victoria scoffed, shifting her bag to the other shoulder. Targeting? Please. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Just look around. How many people like them do you see in first class this time? No one hid behind their phones. A white-haired man in the corner quietly folded his Wall Street Journal and looked directly at her. His voice, low and raspy with age, cut through the air. Mrs. Langford, I think the problem isn't where they're sitting. It's where you're standing. Victoria froze. A small fracture appeared in her practiced smile. Before she could respond, Alyssa and Arya had already gathered their things. Alyssa turned to Linda, voice even, composed. Thank you for handling this properly. We don't want this to affect anyone else. Linda nodded, and in that nod was gratitude, respect, and a quiet kind of sorrow, because these two young women had just taught the room without lecturing what dignity looks like. As they passed, Arya paused beside Victoria. Her tone was gentle, almost kind, which only made it hit harder. You know, the thing that bothers you most probably isn't that we're in first class. It's that we don't need your permission to be here. Then she walked away. The glass doors closed behind them with a soft whir. Linda watched them go, her eyes following until the two figures disappeared down the corridor. She knew, in that moment, a line had been drawn not between wealth and poverty, not between black and white, but between dignity and the illusion of power. Victoria turned, trying to regain her composure, but no one met her gaze. Even Ethan looked away, retreating quietly behind the counter. The silence that filled the lounge now wasn't polite. It was a verdict, a judgment that needed no court. The air inside the Regal Air Elite Lounge had turned solid heavy with the kind of silence that doesn't fade, only deepens. Linda Marston turned away, hoping silence could smother the fire. But everyone knew some fires don't need smoke, only a word. Aria Bennett sat down again, calmly. She opened her bag, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, not the gestures of someone about to explode, but of someone about to decide. She scrolled, selected a number, and pressed call. No hesitation, no anger, just a quiet so sharp it made everyone hear their own heartbeat. From across the room, Victoria Langford sneered, "Oh, here we go. Calling Daddy to complain. How adorable." A couple of nearby passengers stifled a laugh. They had no idea they were watching the quiet rise of a wave that would soon reach the boardroom ceiling. After 3 rings, the call connected. A man's voice came through the speaker, deep, steady, and commanding. "What's going on at the Regal Air Elite Lounge? Sweetheart, you're supposed to be drinking champagne by now." The tone carried the ease of someone used to making decisions that shift markets. At that sound, Linda instinctively straightened her posture. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary man. Aria's voice stayed perfectly level. "Dad, Alyssa and I are at the Regal Air Lounge at Hudson Airport. We were asked to give up our first-class seats 1A and 1B to another passenger because she thought she was more important. She said we were probably just part of the airline's diversity image. Ms. Linda, the manager, handled it correctly, but I think their system has a problem." Every word was calm. Even yet each one hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. Victoria laughed loudly, her voice laced with bravado to hide the flicker of unease. "Oh, marvelous. I suppose Daddy's going to write the airline a little letter about fairness. I've worked with Regal Air for over 10 years. They don't scare easily." Silence followed. Just one long, weighted beat. Then the man's voice returned quieter now, but dense with authority, the calm before a storm. "Mrs. Langford, is it Victoria?" Froze. She blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me. Who is this?" The voice on speaker remained composed, but it carried a pressure that made everyone in the room sit straighter. "I'm Marcus Caldwell, Executive Vice President and Head of Global Strategy at Caldwell Whitmore Group, and if you haven't been following the news, my company finalized the acquisition of 51% of Regal Air's shares 3 months ago." The air shattered. Ethan's pen clattered onto the counter. Linda stood perfectly still. Victoria, the woman who believed she knew half of New York, now stared at the phone as if it had turned to fire in her hands. Aria said nothing. She simply set the phone on the table, letting her father's voice fill the room, deep, calm, and unyielding. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said. "You were asked to give up confirmed seats because someone felt they deserved them more." "Yes," Aria replied. "And they said you were there just for the airline's image." "Yes. Who's in the room right now?" Linda stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I am Mr. Caldwell, Linda Marston, lounge supervisor. I can confirm both Ms. Bennett and Ms. Bennett had valid first-class tickets. I refused to reassign their seats. Several witnesses saw what happened. However, Mrs. Langford made certain remarks." She hesitated, glancing at Victoria. "Remarks of a discriminatory nature?" A long pause. Then Marcus spoke again, quiet, but each syllable cut like steel. "Thank you, Ms. Marston. You handled it correctly. Keep your position and prepare to attend a meeting with Regal Air's CEO tomorrow at 8:30 a. I want your full report firsthand. And as for the staff member who proposed the seat switch, Cole, is it?" Ethan's voice cracked. Yes, sir. I'm here." "Good. Then you'll be there too. Coal 8:30 sharp at Caldwell Whitmore headquarters in Manhattan. You'll learn what serving VIP clients truly means. Ethan's throat bobbed as he nodded silently. The entire lounge had gone still breathless. Then Marcus's tone softened slightly, but the edge remained. And finally, "Mrs. Langford." Victoria gripped her handbag tighter. Her voice was barely a whisper. You're really their father?" "Yes, and I'm also the man who decides who sits where on every Regal Air flight from now on. Effective immediately. Your ticket will be canceled and fully refunded, and your Platinum Premier status revoked permanently." A small, involuntary smile touched Alyssa's lips, not triumphant, not gloating. It was the kind of smile that appears when truth finally does what anger could not. Victoria's face drained of color. You can't do that. I'm a loyal customer. Regal Air now belongs to Caldwell Whitmore," Marcus interrupted, his tone final. "And in my company, loyalty is not an excuse for contempt." A soft click ended the call. Arya picked up her phone and placed it gently on the table. "It's done," she said quietly. Linda didn't speak. She just looked at the twins, a strange mix of shame, admiration, and relief washing over her. In that moment, she understood justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just needs a calm voice and someone patient enough to wait for it. A nearby passenger stood and nodded slightly toward the Bennetts, a silent gesture of respect that said everything words couldn't. Victoria remained motionless. Her phone slipped from her hand onto the chair, its bright screen reflecting a face stripped of certainty, a woman who just lost not only her seat, but the illusion of her status. Alyssa turned to Linda, her voice gentle. "Ms. Marston, I'm sorry you had to witness all this, but thank you for standing by the rules when it mattered. Sometimes it only takes one person speaking up at the right moment to make an entire system see itself differently." Linda bowed her head slightly. She knew that tomorrow, when she walked into that meeting in Manhattan, the silence from this lounge would still be echoing louder than any defense could ever be. The moment Marcus Caldwell's voice came through the speaker, the room froze, deep, clear, carrying a quiet authority that made every sound the clink of a spoon, the rhythm of a breath vanish into stillness. "This is Marcus Caldwell, Executive Vice President and Head of Global Strategy at Caldwell Whitmore Group. 3 months ago, we finalized the acquisition of 51% of Regal Air's shares." The air seemed to drop to a lower temperature, thick, heavy, and humming like a live wire. Ethan Cole turned pale, the color draining from his face. He glanced toward Linda Marston, a plea for help, but she, too, stood frozen. Lips parted slightly as if trying to process what her ears refused to believe. And Victoria Langford, she didn't move. Her designer purse slipped from her hand, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. That sound so small hit the room like the crack of a gun signaling the end of an era. The era where she always stood above everyone else. Marcus's voice filled the silence again, calm yet heavy with consequence. "Miss Marston, tell me this. Why were the feelings of a customer who made racially discriminatory remarks prioritized over the legal rights of 2 paying passengers?" Linda swallowed hard. When she finally spoke, her tone trembled, but every word was honest. "Mr. Caldwell, I didn't prioritize anyone. I confirmed both Mrs. Bennett had valid first-class tickets and refused to move them. But my staff member acted improperly under pressure to please a platinum customer." "Thank you, Ms. Marston," Marcus replied. I hear honesty in your voice. You did the right thing." Linda exhaled softly, part gratitude, part relief, but her eyes stayed on Victoria, who now looked hollow, the color in her face flickering between red and gray. Then Marcus spoke again, quieter, colder. "I live by one rule when I lead. No one uses social privilege to diminish another person's dignity. And if that happened inside a company I now own, then it's not just an employee's failure, it's a failure of culture. No one dared move." Ethan stared at the floor, hands trembling slightly. Linda took a slow breath, eyes lowered. And Victoria. She was still standing, but she looked as though someone had pulled the bones from her frame. Across the room, Arya met Alyssa's eyes. No smile, no gloating, just silence, the kind that makes justice visible. Marcus's voice turned sharp again, the tone of a man unafraid to expose a truth in front of witnesses. "Mrs. Langford, I assume you can hear me. Tell me what made you believe you had the right to ask two young women to give up the seats they paid for, just so you could sit beside your husband." Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. All eyes turned toward her for once, not with deference, but with the uneasy recognition of what power looks like when it's stripped bare. Linda leaned toward Arya and whispered, "Would you like me to turn off the speaker?" Arya shook her head. "No. Sometimes the truth needs to be heard, at full volume." Marcus continued, his tone no longer a reprimand, but something closer to a creed. "I've spent my career building systems that reward merit, not lineage, not color, not status. And today, two young black women were insulted simply for sitting where they belonged. Mrs. Langford, you didn't just insult my daughters. You insulted the very principles of the company your husband profits from." A sharp intake of breath broke the stillness. Victoria took a step back, eyes wide as if hearing the sentence of a lifetime. Alyssa stood slowly, her voice calm, controlled. "Dad, that's enough. You've said what needed to be said." Marcus chuckled softly, not with pride, but with quiet understanding. "Fair enough, sweetheart. But Ms. Marston, make a note. From this moment forward, Regal Air will have a new policy. Every first-class ticket is a contract of honor. No one, under any circumstance, may renegotiate it simply because they believe they deserve more." Linda nodded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and admiration. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, I'll see that it's done." Marcus paused, then added one final line, simple, but heavy as marble. "Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to travel far enough." Click. The call ended. The silence that followed was different now, not the silence of fear, but of realization, a collective awareness settling like dust that sometimes the people you look down on are the ones holding your world up. Ethan spoke softly, almost a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." Linda placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't apologize to me, Ethan. Apologize to yourself for thinking serving power was the same as doing your job." Arya slipped her phone into her bag. Alyssa touched her sister's arm, a quiet gesture that said, "We're done here." They walked toward the exit. No need to look back. No words left to say. Linda watched them go, then turned toward Victoria. The woman's once pristine poise had melted away. Her eyes stared blankly at nothing. Linda's voice, when it came, was low, not angry anymore, just tired. "Mrs. Langford, I think it's time you leave. And this time, you can walk." The glass door slid shut behind her, sealing the scene. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled across the marble floor, glinting off the gold Regal Air logo on the wall. Under that glow, one word in the logo seemed to fade, leaving only the other behind air. Empty, but essential. Linda took a long breath. She knew that tomorrow, when the sun rose over Hudson International, the lounge would no longer be the same. And perhaps, from this very incident, Regal Air would finally remember the one class of respect that can't be bought dignity. Inside the Regal Air Elite Lounge, after that fateful phone call, silence became the loudest sound in the room. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too deeply. Only the speakerphone on Aria Bennett's table glowed faintly, carrying the calm, resonant voice of Marcus Caldwell, the voice of a man who had just pulled the pin from a grenade but still held it firmly in his hand. "Linda, are you still there?" Linda Marston drew a quiet breath. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell." "Good. Listen carefully. I'm issuing 3 directives effective immediately." The entire lounge fell still. Ethan Cole straightened his back, trying to stop his hands from trembling. Victoria Langford gripped her handbag strap until her knuckles whitened. And Alyssa and Aria Bennett, calm as ever, sat quietly, no trace of triumph in their eyes. Marcus's words came slow, deliberate, and sharp enough to feel metallic. "First, Linda, you will personally escort both Miss Bennett and Miss Bennett to their first-class seats. I want to ensure they have a flawless experience from this moment until takeoff. Make sure they know that no one has the power to make them feel they're sitting in the wrong place." Linda bowed her head slightly. Her voice shook just a bit, but it carried warmth. "Yes, sir. I'll see to it right away." There was a pause, the faint sound of a pen scratching paper, the tear of a sheet. Then Marcus spoke again, voice lower, now colder, the kind of cold that lowers the room's temperature. "Second, cancel Mrs. Victoria Langford's ticket for this flight. Process a full refund. Then mark her file. Platinum Premier membership revoked permanently. I don't want a single passenger known for discriminatory behavior listed among Regal Air's elite again." Victoria gasped. "You can't do that. I've been a loyal customer for 10 years, I can." Marcus cut in smoothly. "Because Regal Air now belongs to Caldwell Whitmore, and Caldwell Whitmore does not do business with contempt." She froze, lips trembling as if she'd swallowed ice. No one looked at her. No one spoke up. The other passengers, executives, investors, frequent flyers all sat in heavy silence, not because they agreed, but because they finally understood that when justice speaks, silence is the wisest reply. Marcus continued, "Third, Linda, you and your staff member, Ethan Cole, will report to Regal Air headquarters, 47th floor, Caldwell Whitmore Tower, New York City, 8:30 a. Tomorrow, Regal Air's new CEO, Daniel Whitmore, will hear your account of this incident directly. This isn't disciplinary. It's an opportunity to rewrite what this airline thinks premium service means." Ethan could barely stand straight. He nodded rapidly, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes, sir. I'll be there." Marcus paused. Then came the final order, not just for them, but for everyone in the room. Effective immediately, Regal Air will enforce a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, subtle or blatant. Anyone who cannot live with that may fly elsewhere, but those who stay must relearn how to treat people. The words sliced through the air cleanly, without emphasis, without anger, but final as a judge's gavel. Linda clasped her hands together. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Truly, thank you for not letting this pass." "No, Linda," Marcus replied softly. "Thank you for standing up before you knew who they were. As for my daughters, treat them as you would any other customer. No favors, no exceptions. Fairness is the only privilege I recognize." Click. The line went dead. This time, The silence that followed felt different, not fearful, not strained. It was the stillness that comes after a storm, when people realize they've just witnessed something that matters more than money, class, or status. Linda turned toward the twins, her tone gentle. "Miss Alyssa, Miss Aria, I'll escort you to the gate. The crew's been notified." Aria smiled faintly. "Thank you. Linda, you did the right thing before you had a reason to," Alyssa added softly. "Not everyone in a high position makes the right call. Thank you for proving that sometimes. Integrity sits behind the counter, not above it." They gathered their things and left. The doors slid shut behind them, and the lounge seemed heavier, not because 2 passengers were gone, but because of what they'd left behind, a mirror held up to those who still believed skin color defined worth. Victoria Langford still stood frozen, arms wrapped around her bag, her face drained of color. A junior attendant approached quietly. "Mrs. Langford, we've been instructed to escort you out of the lounge. Your refund has been processed." Victoria looked around, searching for one sympathetic glance. There were none. Not out of cruelty, but because no one wanted to see themselves reflected in her eyes. The woman who once entered every room with her head high now walked out between 2 silent employees. Her heels, once the sound of privilege, now struck the floor, like hollow echoes of something lost. When Linda returned, the room remained quiet. A middle-aged man by the window raised his glass slightly. "Ms. Marston, if I may, you did the right thing. It's been a long time since I've seen anyone put respect above a loyalty card." Linda gave a tired smile. "Thank you, sir. I learned today that some tickets aren't meant to take us places. They're meant to test whether we still have humanity." The man paused, nodded, and lifted his whiskey in silent agreement. Meanwhile, Alyssa and Aria walked calmly toward the boarding gate. A senior Regal Air attendant waited, bowing slightly as they approached. "Miss Bennett, we'll be escorting you to the aircraft. The captain and crew are ready for your departure." They nodded politely. No need for more words. When the first-class door opened, warm light spilled across their faces steady, unflinching, and in their eyes was something unspoken, the quiet conviction that sometimes all it takes is a single phone call to make history change its course. The 47th floor Caldwell Whitmore Tower woke to a pale morning light streaming through walls of glass. There were no greetings, no laughter, only the hushed stillness of a day everyone knew would redraw the company's lines. Linda Marston stepped out of the elevator, a folder tucked beneath one arm, her old employee badge in the other hand. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Beside her, Ethan Cole walked silently, fists clenched, face drained of color. They stopped in front of the frosted glass door etched with silver letters, "Daniel Whitmore, CEO, Regal Air Division." The door slid open. The conference room inside gleamed spotless, almost sterile, the kind of place where even the wind seemed to walk on tiptoe. At the far end of the table sat Daniel Whitmore, a man in his 40s with steel-gray hair and the kind of composed gaze that could steady a room without raising a voice. He gestured toward the seats across from him. Behind him, the wall-sized screen flickered to life security footage from Regal Air Elite Lounge, Hudson International Airport. The sound was faint, but every person in the room already knew each word by heart. Daniel didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. He simply watched as Victoria pointed, as Ethan hesitated, as Linda intervened. His expression didn't judge, only absorbed. When the recording ended, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "A small incident, yet a magnified reflection of everything broken in our culture." Linda gave a slight nod. Ethan kept his eyes down. Daniel continued. Voice, even Ms. Marston. Mr. Cole. I've reviewed your reports. And this isn't the first platinum priority incident at Hudson Lounge. I've seen the emails. The old complaints, all with the same pattern: employees afraid to displease wealthy passengers, afraid to lose ranking bonuses. In other words, we've built a culture of submission to privilege. He stood and walked toward the panoramic window. Below, the city spread wide and glittering towers rising like trophies of hierarchy. His voice echoed softly, almost as if to himself. We seem to have forgotten that a plane ticket is a contract, not a crown. Customers don't buy the right to humiliate others. They buy a seat, and with it, a measure of respect. Linda looked up, her tone low but sincere. Sir, I understand. My mistake was not shutting the situation down sooner. Daniel turned back, interrupting gently but firmly. No, Ms. Marston. I watched the recording. You were the only one who said, you can't force a passenger to leave their seat. You acted on principle before knowing who they were. That's something this company has almost forgotten doing, what's right when no one's watching. Linda froze, then bowed her head. Thank you, sir. Daniel opened a second folder. And now, Mr. Cole. Ethan shot up, blurting out his apology before the sentence could land. Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to discriminate. I just thought, if I lost a platinum customer, I'd lose points on my review. I only wanted to please everyone. Daniel lifted a hand, stopping him. That, he said quietly, is exactly the problem. You thought service meant pleasing power, but true service means honoring values. You chose comfort over conscience. Ethan's hands tightened until the knuckles whitened. Daniel met his eyes. Ethan, I'm releasing you from Regal Air. The words hung in the air like a dropped anchor. Ethan swallowed, nodded slowly, eyes damp. I understand, sir. But Daniel wasn't finished. You won't be blacklisted, he said evenly. I've arranged for you to join Axton Freight, one of our logistics partners. You'll start at their warehouse handling shipments, learning the worth of every order, whether it's $50 or $5 million. In a year, if you truly grasp what I'm saying today, you can reapply to Regal Air. Ethan looked up, stunned. You're giving me another chance. Daniel smiled faintly. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about giving people a way back, if they choose to walk it. Linda turned toward Daniel, admiration softening her features. And what about me? Sir. Daniel closed the file and sat back down, his tone steady but warm. You're not being dismissed, Ms. Marston. You're being promoted to Director of Global VIP Service Training. You'll rewrite every part of our elite service program: greetings, posture, tone, even silence. And the first line of your new manual will read, every ticket is a contract of honor. Linda's breath caught. It took her a moment to answer. I'll give it everything I have. Thank you for trusting me. Daniel nodded. Not because you were flawless, but because you remembered to stand tall when everyone else bowed. The room lightened, just slightly. Outside, sunlight spilled across the skyline. Linda turned toward the window, watching the city wake, and wondered how many people out there were still living inside invisible hierarchies they'd never questioned. Daniel closed his laptop, his voice quieter now, not a decree, but a reflection justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be carried out faithfully, whether in a luxury lounge or dusty warehouse. If Regal Air truly wants to soar, We must first relearn how to treat people before we learn how to sell tickets. He stood, extending his hand. Linda shook it, her grip steady, warm. Ethan bowed his head, voice trembling but clear. "I won't forget this lesson, sir." Daniel nodded once, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Through the misted glass, sunlight glinted off the wing of a departing Regal Air jet. Silent, on time, climbing through the morning sky. And for the first time, it seemed to carry something more than passengers. It carried a message quiet, unwavering, and deserved justice knows how to fly. Monday morning. The 32nd floor of Kensington & Rowe LLP, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, hummed with its usual precision black coffee, crisp suits, the measured click of leather shoes on marble floors. But inside Edward Langford's office, the air was different, still, heavy, suffocating. A thick white envelope lay in the center of his mahogany desk, embossed with the silver seal of Caldwell Whitmore Group. Stamped in the corner, "Confidential, urgent." Edward stared at it for a long moment before sliding a letter opener across the flap. He was a senior partner, accustomed to letters worth millions, but none had ever felt like this. None had ever felt terminal. He unfolded the letter, 3 paragraphs, and a USB drive labeled Regal Air Incident, Hudson Lounge Recording. The playback began with a voice he knew instantly. "I understand you have to keep your image diverse for first class, but letting them sit up front, well, I suppose it's good PR. Victoria." His wife. Then came another voice, deep, composed, cold as stone. "I'm Marcus Caldwell, Executive VP and Head of Global Strategy for Caldwell Whitmore Group, and 3 months ago, we acquired 51% of Regal Air." Edward's hand went slack. The pen dropped from his fingers. He lowered his gaze to the typed lines on the letter, "Due to the discriminatory and reputationally damaging conduct of Mrs. Victoria Langford, spouse of partner Edward Langford, toward a member of the Caldwell Whitmore executive family. Caldwell Whitmore hereby terminates its legal service contract with Kensington & Rowe LLP, valued at $18.6 million per annum, effective immediately, and below. One final line neat, surgical. We do not partner with any organization that tolerates discrimination in any form." Edward sat motionless. In his mind, the scene replayed Victoria in her pearl earrings, laughing as she recounted how 2 young black women stole my seat. He remembered her tone, indignant, self-assured the way she framed herself as the victim. Now he understood. Those women weren't nobodies. They were Alyssa and Aria Bennett, daughters of Marcus Caldwell. A chill crept up his spine, not from fear of losing the account, but from realizing 30 years of reputation had been erased by one careless, cruel sentence. The door burst open. A young associate stepped in, pale and anxious. "Mr. Langford, the managing committee wants you upstairs. Immediately. And the press may have part of the story." Edward didn't speak. He simply nodded, buttoned his jacket, and walked out into the long, glass-lined hallway. Every passing face averted its eyes. No one needed to say it. They all knew. On the 33rd floor, the boardroom waited. 7 partners people. He'd shared cigars, lawsuits, and champagne, with sat in silence as he entered. Harold Crane, the managing partner, spoke first. "Edward, you understand how serious this is." Edward nodded once. "I do. I've heard the recording." Harold leaned forward, his tone clipped. "Caldwell Whitmore represented nearly 15% of firm revenue. They've pulled every contract, U.S. and Europe." Their statement was blunt, He slid the letter across the table. Discriminatory behavior by the spouse of a senior partner reflects the organizational culture of the firm they represent. They said they no longer trust us to uphold an ethical standard, a female partner added softly. We know you didn't say those words, Edward, but the public won't care. They'll call it the elite racism scandal. Edward gave a weary laugh, the kind that comes from the edge of exhaustion. I once thought reputation was armor. Turns out it's tissue paper, and one careless spark can burn through it. Harold exhaled, folding his hands. There are two options. You resign quietly. We contain the fallout, and you keep your severance, or the partners vote to expel you. And you know what that means. Silence. The hum of the air vent filled the room, like the breath of a hospital corridor. Edward stared down at his hands that had once closed million-dollar deals, argued before judges, shaped careers. Now, they trembled slightly. He looked up. His voice was low, rough but steady. I'll resign. Not because I'm afraid, but because some losses deserve to be accepted. When he left the room, the corridor glared too bright, the glass reflecting back a man who suddenly looked older than his years. On his desk downstairs lay another envelope, his severance papers, and a folded copy of that morning's Wall Street Journal. The headline read, Regal Air enforces zero-tolerance policy. 2 black entrepreneurs become new faces of corporate integrity. Below it, a photo, Alyssa and Aria Bennett in Regal Air's first-class cabin. Sunlight catching their calm, assured smiles. Edward stared at it for a long time. Not with anger, but with the quiet understanding that karma never hurries. It simply waits. For precision. That evening, he drove back to the Greenwich estate. The house was immaculate as ever, but cold. Inside. Victoria Langford sat in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp with indignation. They've made me the villain. I just wanted to change seats, that's all. How could anyone take it this far? Edward stood at the doorway, silent. He looked at her, the woman who had once boasted about always sitting up front. Now, she was clinging to the last shreds of her privilege, unaware of how far she'd fallen. He walked to the coffee table and set down a white envelope, his resignation from Kensington and Row. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, but colder than she'd ever heard. Victoria, you didn't just lose your seat on a plane. You lost mine too, and the career I spent 30 years building. She turned, eyes wide. Edward, what are you saying? He met her gaze, no anger, only a hollow kind of clarity. Justice takes many forms. Vic, this time, it wore the faces of the 2 women you called these girls. He walked out without another word. Outside, the autumn wind stirred the trees, brushing through the quiet streets of Greenwich. Overhead, a Regal Air jet cut through the evening sky, its red wing light blinking against the clouds. Edward looked up, following it until it disappeared. And in that moment, he understood. Justice doesn't always thunder down from the heavens. Sometimes, it simply takes the seat you thought was yours and gives it to someone who earned it. Tuesday afternoon. The Manhattan sky hung low and gray, as if even the clouds knew bad news was coming. Edward Langford sat in the boardroom of Kensington and Row LLP, his reflection staring back from the polished walnut table, exhausted, rigid, defeated. Across from him sat Harold Crane, the firm's managing partner, flanked by 2 lawyers from HR. Between them lay 2 folders, one labeled voluntary resignation, the other partnership expulsion vote. Harold spoke first, softly, but each word landed like a hammer. Edward, We've discussed this thoroughly. You have two choices. Option 1, resign voluntarily. You'll receive a modest severance and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will not speak of Caldwell Whitmore, the incident, or the loss of their account. Option 2, we hold a vote to expel you as partner, and you already know how that vote would end. The room was silent, save for the faint patter of rain against the glass roof above. Edward gave a small, bitter smile, the smile of a man who's run out of things to defend. 30 years in this firm, he murmured. I've saved us from lawsuits worth hundreds of millions. And now, because of one stupid sentence from my wife, you're throwing me away like a liability. Harold didn't flinch. It's not your wife we're reacting to, Edward. It's the image she created. Caldwell Whitmore isn't just a client. They're the gateway to our entire European portfolio. You, more than anyone, should understand what that means. He slid the first folder across the table. Sign this, walk away with some dignity, or force the vote, and leave with none. Edward looked down. At the top of the page, voluntary resignation, mutual agreement, beneath it, a severance figure, a fraction of what he'd negotiated for others. He signed, not for the money, but because he knew that, in law, reputation was the only true currency, and his was already worthless. That evening, rain fell over Greenwich, Connecticut, drumming softly against the white columns of the Langford estate. Inside, the lights were dim. Victoria Langford sat on the sofa, draped in a cream silk robe, a half-finished glass of wine in hand. The television played the evening news. Caldwell Whitmore Group has officially terminated its legal contract with Kensington & Rowe LLP following a discrimination incident at the Regal Air Lounge. The two young black entrepreneurs, Alyssa and Aria Bennett, are being praised for their calm and professional response. Victoria muted the TV, scoffing, ridiculous. Those girls are being treated like heroes. I just wanted to sit next to my husband, and suddenly I'm the villain. Edward stood in the doorway, his suit still damp, briefcase in hand. His voice was low, gravelly. No, Victoria, you became the villain because of how you spoke, because you saw them as smaller than you and said it out loud. She frowned, defensive. Edward, you know I didn't mean it that way. I was just upset. Who wouldn't want to sit with their husband? He gave a dry, humorless laugh. No, you weren't upset. You were offended because they didn't look like you, because they were young, confident, and didn't need permission to sit in first class. You called them these girls, as if the air they breathed was borrowed. And now, the price of that arrogance is my 30-year career. Victoria slammed her glass down, the wine splashing red against the white marble. So now it's my fault I didn't cancel the contract. Edward. He stepped closer, eyes hollow. No, you didn't sign the letter, but you wrote the reason they sent it. I had to sit there this morning and listen as the board replayed your voice, word for word. These girls. Those girls, Victoria, are Marcus Caldwell's daughters, the same Caldwell who owns our biggest client. Victoria froze, her face draining of color. Marcus Caldwell. You mean his daughters? Edward nodded. Yes. And now he knows exactly who we are, or at least, who we've become. The room went still. Outside, the rain thickened, whispering against the glass like the measured breath of consequence. Victoria's voice trembled. Edward, can't you fix it? He looked at her, the woman who had once defined success by the weight of a diamond and the number of zeros on a statement. No one can fix a reputation that burns itself down. I lost my job. The firm lost its largest client. And we lost the illusion that our privilege was permanent. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and downed it in one swallow. His voice rasped, heavy with something colder than anger. You know what hurts most. Not the job, not the scandal. It's realizing I've spent half my life in a house that believed dignity could be bought with a platinum card. Victoria began to cry, her voice breaking. Edward didn't move. He loosened his tie, dropped it on the table. Tomorrow. I'm leaving, he said quietly. I need to see a world where people are judged by how they treat others, not by what they own. Her sobs sharpened. You're abandoning me. Over one mistake. He turned back, calm, almost gentle. No, Vic. A mistake is something you regret. You still believe you were right, and that can't be fixed. He walked out, the door shut behind him, soft, final. In the silence that followed, a framed photo on the wall. Their 20th anniversary slipped from its nail and shattered on the floor. Glass scattered, catching the lamplight in a dozen fractured reflections. Victoria sank to the couch, eyes unfocused. On the floor nearby lay a fallen newspaper. Its headline read, Caldwell Whitmore launches Global Respect First, initiative inspired by Regal Air incident. Next to it was a photo Marcus Caldwell with Alyssa and Aria Bennett, smiling with quiet pride beneath the Regal Air insignia. Victoria stared at it for a long time, and for the first time, she didn't feel angry. She felt small. Outside, the rain eased, but inside that grand, silent house, the storm had only just begun. Morning mist lingered over London. Soft light filtered through white curtains, touching two neatly pressed ivory suits draped across the chairs. Alyssa Bennett fastened the button of her blazer, the end of her long braid brushing her shoulder. Beside her, Aria was focused on her tablet, scrolling through the last few slides of their presentation. You think they'll ask about the blockchain part? Aria asked, half joking, half serious. Alyssa smiled. If they do, just answer the way you did at Harvard Demo Day. Just be yourself. Outside, the banner of the Global Innovators Summit 2025 hung high over Westminster Square Innovation for Inclusion. The sisters exchanged a quiet look, calm, resolute. That fateful flight from New York to London, the one they were almost forced to leave their first-class seats on, had brought them here. Not as passengers, as keynote speakers. The main hall of the summit looked like an opera house. Soft lights, rows of filled seats, a quiet hum of anticipation. On stage, the logo of their fintech company, Nexus Rise, glowed against the massive screen behind them. Alyssa stepped forward first, her voice steady, low, measured. We believe financial tools aren't just for those who already have wealth. They're bridges for those who deserve a new start. Aria followed, her tone brighter, more animated. Nexus Rise wasn't built just to teach investing. It was built to help people understand the worth of every dollar they earn and the right to be respected when they spend it. Behind them, the screen filled with real images. Single mothers learning to budget, young students launching micro-businesses, immigrant families opening their first savings accounts. The audience was silent, not from confusion, but from understanding. When the final slide faded, the pause lingered, then came one pair of hands clapping, then another, and then the whole auditorium rose to its feet. Alyssa bowed slightly. Aria glanced toward the front row, where their father, Marcus Caldwell, sat watching, his proud smile subtle, but full. Later, In the VIP lounge, the sisters were introduced to Helen Vaughn, director of the Caldwell Whitmore Foundation, a composed woman with silver hair and a tailored navy suit. She extended her hand warmly. "Marcus has told us about you both," she said. "We see the Regal Air incident as a moment that made the world stop and look, but what truly impressed us wasn't the scandal. It was your composure." Alyssa smiled softly. "We just thought, if we got angry, we'd lose our voice. But if we stayed calm, maybe people would finally listen." Helen nodded. "And because of that, the Caldwell Whitmore Foundation is launching a new initiative, Equity by Design, a $10 million fund to support startups founded by women and people of color. And we'd like you both to serve on the selection board." Arya blinked, surprised. "You mean we'll be choosing who gets funded?" Helen smiled. "Exactly. Those who were once dismissed as diversity hires will now define what diversity truly means." For a heartbeat, the room went completely still. The sisters looked at each other, and without speaking, they understood. Justice had flown farther than either of them imagined. That evening, London shimmered under city lights. The sisters sat at a small cafe by the Thames, where reflections of gold rippled across the water. Arya leaned on her hand, her voice quiet. "Do you remember the look on that woman's face, Victoria Langford? I'm not angry anymore. I just feel sorry for her." Alyssa gazed toward the river, her tone soft as the wind. "Anger is easy. Forgiveness that's harder. But maybe that's what makes justice peaceful." A cool breeze drifted by, carrying the damp scent of the river and the distant chime of Big Ben. Arya's phone lit up with a news alert. Regal Air launches new campaign, "The New Face of First Class. Your seat is earned." She laughed gently, turning the screen toward her sister. "Looks like they learned something." Alyssa looked at the image. Two young black women seated in first class, working and smiling. Across the bottom, the tagline read, "Regal Air, your seat is earned." She said nothing, only reached across and took her sister's hand. Across town, Marcus Caldwell sat in his hotel suite, watching the replay of their summit speech. Alyssa's voice came through the speakers, calm, confident, resolute. "We don't fight discrimination with vengeance. We fight it by proving that achievement has no color." Marcus smiled, setting his phone down and taking a slow sip of wine. He knew justice might begin with a single phone call, but it must be completed through action. And his daughters were that action. As night settled over London, a Regal Air jet soared through the clouds, its lights tracing a silent path above the city. Somewhere inside that glow, a story had come full circle, one that began with humiliation and ended with hope. Two young women who were once told to give up their seats now sat at the forefront, not just of a plane, but of a global conversation about equality, dignity, and the quiet power of grace. 3 weeks after the Global Innovator Summit, the morning at Regal Air's Manhattan headquarters began with an unusual sight. On the massive LED wall in the main lobby, a new ad played under the simple title, "The New Face of First Class." Soft piano notes, slow pacing, a sunlit first-class cabin, champagne-colored leather seats, serene and gleaming. Two young black women, poised and elegant, sat in seats 1A and 1B. One typed quietly on a laptop. The other smiled, glancing over a silent exchange of focus and warmth. The camera drifted around them, unhurried, as though even the light itself wanted to linger in their calm. Then came the narrator's voice, deep, composed, and steady. First class isn't about privilege, it's about purpose. Regal Air, your seat is earned. The final image froze Alyssa and Arya Bennett, facing the camera directly. No poses, no pretense. Just a small, genuine smile, the kind that carried quiet power, the kind that could still the room. Outside the headquarters, employees paused to watch. A few recognized them, the Hudson Lounge twins, but not as symbols of scandal anymore. Now, they were the face of a new Regal Air, an airline that wasn't just flying passengers, but carrying an apology. Elegant, subtle, sincere. The campaign launched the same day Regal Air unveiled its new global service code. Every paid seat is a promise of respect. The media called it the smartest corporate redemption of the year, a move both humble and strategic, an answer that didn't shout, but spoke volumes. On the 18th floor, behind glass walls, Marcus Caldwell and Daniel Whitmore sat watching the ad for the third time. Daniel chuckled softly, voice gravelly from years of boardrooms and cigars. "No need for slogans," he said. "One picture like that, and everyone understands fairness isn't a statement, it's infrastructure." Marcus didn't reply right away. He kept watching his daughters on the screen. There was pride in his eyes, but also reflection. "This world," he said quietly, "won't change because of one video, but sometimes the right image can make an entire system see itself." Daniel nodded. "You know, since this campaign launched, first-class membership sign-ups are up 12%. But the real win. Hundreds of messages from passengers of color saying it's the first time they've ever felt they belonged in that space." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the kind of profit I like." "Teton." "Whore. Across the Atlantic? In London?" Alyssa and Arya were wrapping up a long day at the Nexus Rise office when a young staffer burst in, breathless, holding an iPad. "You have to see this. Regal Air just dropped the new ad. You're the face of it." Arya laughed. "They didn't even tell us Alyssa took the tablet." The screen glowed with the image of the two of them, bathed in golden light above the clouds. She stared for a moment, then said softly, "When they filmed this, I didn't think it would mean this much. It's not really about the seat. It's about the space you have to earn, through work, through grace." Arya leaned back against the table, voice quiet but sure. That seat was never just a seat. It was a mirror. And now they finally see themselves in it. The next morning, headlines spread across the media. The New York Times, Regal Air's new campaign. Doesn't shout, it listens. The Financial Herald called it an apology built on vision. On Twitter, the image of the Bennett sisters flooded timelines under hashtags. "So your seat earned Brusm new first class." Even rival airlines began quietly revising their marketing, toning down the exclusivity in their VIP ads, replacing pale sameness with genuine diversity. The ripple moved outward, not loud, but steady. That night, at a small restaurant along the Thames, Alyssa and Arya shared dinner with their father. Marcus set his phone down beside a half-finished glass of wine. His tone was warm, but weighty. "You two did what my generation never quite managed. You made people understand that justice isn't noise, it's motion." Arya grinned. "Are you talking about the ad, or our speech at the summit?" Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "I'm talking about the moment you chose not to get angry. If you'd reacted the way people expected, shouted, thought none of this would exist. No ad, no fund, no shift. Alyssa swirled her glass, the reflection of the city lights shimmering within it. Justice doesn't always move fast, she said, but it never loses its way. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes softening with belief. Outside, the city lights spilled across the Thames ribbons of gold stretching between two banks, like a bridge between what was and what's becoming. And across the ocean, in airports from New York to Nairobi, digital screens glowed with the same image, the new face of first-class Regal Air, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but of respect. They say that at JFK that morning, a middle-aged black passenger stopped in front of one of those screens. He watched quietly for a long time, then smiled and said to the man beside him, "You know, for the first time, I feel like this flight's actually meant for me." Monday morning sunlight spilled through the glass towers of Midtown Manhattan. Across Fifth Avenue, digital billboards flickered to life, every screen showing the same image. Not a movie star, not a politician, but two young black women, Alyssa and Aria Bennett, seated in the first-class cabin of Regal Air. They sat in seats 1A and 1B, serene, working and smiling as golden light poured through the window, tracing a soft halo around their braided hair. Across the screen, the words appeared, "Regal Air. Your seat is earned." No slogans, no speeches, no tears, just image and truth. Madon. In another part of the world, inside a grand house in Greenwich, Victoria Langford caught the ad on her morning television. The gentle voiceover filled her quiet living room, the same room lined with silver-framed photos of galas, champagne flutes, and the frozen smile of a woman who once believed the world revolved around her. This time, she didn't smile. Her finger hovered over the remote, ready to turn it off, but she couldn't. Her eyes stayed locked on the two women she once dismissed, women who now represented the very airline that once had to please her. And worst of all, she remembered the sentence she had thrown out that day. So casually cruel, I guess they look good up front. Good PR. She hadn't known then that her words would become prophecy, a prophecy of consequence. In her mind, she heard again the cold, steady voice of Marcus Caldwell over the speakerphone. Regal Air will not tolerate discrimination. At the time, she thought it was a threat. Now she understood it was a plan. He hadn't just punished her. He'd rebuilt an entire system around what she did. He turned her humiliation into a lesson, public, lasting, undeniable. At the end of the commercial, a final line appeared, "First class isn't inherited, it's earned." Victoria gave a small, crooked smile, half bitter, half resigned. Sometimes, justice doesn't fall like a hammer. Sometimes, it lands softly on a billboard. Across the ocean in London, Alyssa sat in the Nexus Rise office, reading from the Financial Herald Regal Air's campaign. The new face of first class has become an instant cultural milestone, turning a story of prejudice into a portrait of progress. Aria entered, 2 coffees in hand. "See this," she said, grinning. "They're calling us the face of progress. That sounds heavier than giving a keynote." Alyssa smiled faintly. Real justice doesn't have to speak. It just has to stand in the right place. Her words hung quietly in the air, simple, weighty, true. Neither sister spoke after that. They didn't need to. They both understood the fight they never joined, in anger, had changed more than rage ever could. High above Manhattan, in Regal Air's executive suite, Marcus Caldwell and Daniel Whitmore reviewed the campaign report. Daniel nodded approvingly. "We've never had a response like this. But it's not the numbers that impress me. It's the letters." People say they feel respected, not just served. Marcus smiled slightly. That's the difference between marketing and awakening. This campaign wasn't about selling tickets. It was about making amends. He paused, then added quietly, "It's funny. Victoria Langford once said my daughters were just there for the diversity brochure. Now, they are the brochure, just not in the way she imagined." Daniel's chuckle was low, warm. "That's poetic justice." Marcus nodded. "Yes," he said softly, "that's the most beautiful kind." Oh. Days later, at Hudson International Airport, where it all began, the same ad played on a screen inside the elite lounge. Passengers stopped to watch. A young brown-skinned girl, maybe 12, tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed, "Mom, look, they look like me." Her mother smiled, eyes shining. "Yes, sweetheart, and that's why you should believe you can sit anywhere you want." Her words floated through the quiet lounge, once a temple of privilege, now a sanctuary of hope. Meanwhile, in Greenwich, Victoria turned off the TV and dimmed the lights. But the image of those two women stayed vivid, unshakable. They had never sought revenge. They hadn't gone online to expose her. They simply lived with dignity, with grace, and in doing so, they made the world take notice. Victoria sat there for a long time, still and small, and in that silence, she finally understood something she never had before. When you look down on someone, you rarely notice they might already be standing higher than you. Above the night sky, a Regal Air jet sliced through the clouds, its lights blinking against the dark. On its body, the words gleamed white and clear, "The new face of first class." Inside, seats 1A and 1B were occupied as always by Alyssa and Arya Bennett. Not because of privilege, because they'd earned it. Alyssa glanced out the window, her voice quiet, steady like the final line of a poem. Maybe justice doesn't need to speak. It just needs the right seat. The final frame of the new face of first class campaign faded to black, leaving a single line of text in the bottom corner. Every paid seat is a contract, every person a promise of respect. No swelling music, no applause, only silence, the kind that follows when justice has been done the right way. Inside Regal Air's Manhattan headquarters, during the final campaign meeting, Marcus Caldwell looked around the table. For a while, no one spoke. Then he said quietly, "People think justice is something grand courts, verdicts, punishment. But sometimes, it's as simple as not forcing someone to give up their seat." Laughter broke the tension for a moment, but everyone understood he wasn't really talking about seats. He was talking about dignity. Daniel Whitmore, the CEO, nodded slowly. "The Hudson Lounge incident taught us the biggest lesson of all," he said. "First class isn't a color or a loyalty tier. It's a journey, the one you take to deserve it," Marcus added. "And more than that, it's a reminder to us all, never let entitlement replace fairness. The old system thought respect could be sold. Now, we know it's an obligation." In an interview with BBC Business Today, Alyssa Bennett was asked, "How does it feel to become the face of such a cultural shift?" Alyssa smiled softly, her tone calm and grounded. "We never set out to be symbols," she said. "We just wanted to fly like everyone else. That ticket was paid for by our work, not by our skin." The reporter nodded, silent for a few seconds. Alyssa went on. "What moves me most is seeing others treated with respect, not because of who they are, but because they deserve it. That's real justice." Dumped him. Meanwhile, Arya was in Atlanta, speaking at a student forum titled The Intelligent Response to Injustice. She recounted the airport story not as drama, but as a lesson. "That day," she said gently, "I learned something. If you lose your temper, you lose your story. But if you stay silent, the truth tells it for you." The auditorium went still. A young brown-skinned student raised her hand and asked, "Do you think justice always comes?" Arya smiled. "No," she said, "but wisdom always arrives first. And when wisdom stays long enough, justice finds its way." In Nar, in Greenwich, the Langford estate was quiet, now eerily so. The iron gate stayed shut. Victoria's luxury car no longer sat in the private Regal Air hangar. Her platinum premier status had been revoked. No one called her Mrs. Langford, preferred elite anymore. She had once sneered, "Those girls are just there for the diversity brochure." And now they were the brochure. Not for diversity quotas, but for excellence. Not for tokenism, but for truth. She had tried to push them out of first class, and in doing so, she'd been pushed out of privilege both literally and symbolically. No revenge was needed. The system corrected itself. That's karma, in a corporate world that finally learned how to listen. That single phone call through Arya's speaker had set off a chain reaction from lounge, to airline, to parent corporation, to law firm, to high society, to global media. A domino effect, not powered by outrage, but by truth. Each level of privilege forced to look inward and see the reflection it had long ignored. And what they saw was simple. Respect has no color, and real justice never needs noise. In a televised interview about the journey from injustice to symbol, Marcus was asked, "Do you see your daughters as icons now?" He smiled faintly. "I don't call it symbolism," he said. "I call it balance. The seat they tried to take away, that became the place my daughters used to teach the world a lesson." The host chuckled. "A lesson in justice." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said, "a lesson in dignity." Today, inside the Hudson International Airport Elite Lounge, a small bronze plaque hangs quietly on the wall. No fanfare, no press release. Dedicated to every passenger who believes dignity should never need an upgrade. No one takes photos of it. No hashtags. But travelers still pause, read for a few seconds, and move on carrying with them something light, yet lasting awareness. Above New York's sky, a Regal Air A350 ascended into the sunlight, its silver wings glinting against the horizon. In seats, 1A and 1B, Alyssa and Arya Bennett worked side by side, laptops open, calm as ever. No words were needed, just a glance between them. A quiet understanding. They had won not through power, but through principle. Alyssa whispered, almost to herself. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone calm enough to hear it. The plane rose through the clouds, leaving behind a streak of light silent, but unmistakable. If you've ever been pushed down by prejudice, remember sometimes they don't realize they're pushing themselves away from justice, because real justice doesn't need to be fought over. It simply waits for the right person to sit down. The story of Alyssa and Arya Bennett teaches us something profoundly human. Justice doesn't always arrive through outrage sometimes. It comes through intellect and self-respect. When they were asked to give up their seats not because they were wrong, but because they didn't fit the first-class image They could have shouted, protested, made a scene, but they didn't. They chose composure. And in that quiet strength, the truth of the system revealed itself, a system that once placed white privilege above human worth. Their power didn't come from family influence or hidden connections. It came from real talent, real achievement, and real dignity. That small act, staying calm when humiliated, spread like the butterfly effect. It reshaped corporate culture, humbled arrogance, and reignited the belief that every earned seat deserves respect. In life, each of us has probably been underestimated, judged by how we look, where we come from, or what people assume we're worth. But remember this, a wise reaction will always outlast a loud one. When you hold steady in your values, the world eventually adjusts itself to treat you as you deserve. If you believe dignity doesn't need an upgrade, only recognition, then like, share, and subscribe to help spread stories of justice, empathy, and awareness. Because in our own way, each of us has the power to be first class.